What if the most influential thinker in Western history never wrote a single word? What if his only legacy was the questions he asked and the way he made people think? This is the story of Socrates, a man who walked barefoot through the streets of ancient Athens, stopping strangers to ask them what they believed and why. A man who challenged politicians, poets, and priests, not with anger but with reason, and for that he was condemned to die. Yet more than 2,000 years later, his ideas still shape the way we learn, debate, and search for truth. He never built temples, wrote books, or sought followers, but he inspired some of the greatest minds in history. Plato, Aristotle, and countless others traced their wisdom back to him. So, who was Socrates? Why did his questions disturb an entire city? And how did a man who claimed to know nothing become the foundation of Western? Let's find out. Chapter 1. Athens, the birthplace of questions. To understand Socrates, we must first understand his city, Athens. It was a place unlike any other in the ancient world. A shining city of marble temples, bustling marketplaces, and endless debate. The air itself seemed to vibrate with ideas. This was the 5th century before Christ, the golden age of Athens. Democracy was young and fragile. Artists sculpted gods in stone. Playwrights filled theaters with tragedy and laughter, and citizens gathered in the agora, the public square, to argue about justice, politics, and the meaning of life. But beneath the beauty and brilliance, Athens was also proud, restless, and often blind to its own flaws. People cared deeply about reputation and appearance. Wisdom was often measured by how well one could speak, not by how much one truly understood. And then came Socrates, a man who didn't fit the image of a philosopher or a scholar. He owned almost nothing. He walked barefoot, wore the same simple cloak year after year, and spent his days talking with anyone who would listen. Merchants, soldiers, politicians, and students. To many, he was strange. To some, he was annoying. But to others, he was a kind of mirror, one that forced them to look at themselves. He asked questions that cut through pride and illusion. What is justice? What is courage? What is a good life? Simple questions, but ones that made even the most confident Athenians stumble. Soon, people began calling him the gadfly of Athens, a small insect that bites and stings to keep a great horse from falling asleep. Athens, he said, was that horse, and he was determined to keep it awake. Chapter 2. The Life of Socrates. Socrates was born around 470 BCE in a modest Athenian family. His father was a stonemason and his mother a midwife, perhaps fitting for a man who would later describe himself as helping others give birth to their own ideas. He grew up during a time when Athens was rising to power. But unlike many of his fellow citizens, Socrates wasn't drawn to wealth or politics. He sought something deeper, a way to understand what it truly means to live well. As a young man, he served as a soldier in several battles. He fought bravely, showing not only strength, but remarkable calm under pressure. Those who fought beside him said he was fearless, the same calmness he would later show in front of his judges, and even in the face of death. Socrates married a woman named Xanthippe, known for her strong personality. They had children, but he was rarely home. His real passion was conversation, and his classroom was the city itself. Every day he wandered through the agora, the heart of Athenian life. He approached anyone, rich or poor, young or old, and began asking questions. He never charged money, unlike the sophists, who were paid teachers of rhetoric. Socrates believed wisdom couldn't be sold because it wasn't a set of answers, it was a way of thinking. He lived simply, often barefoot, owning little more than his cloak and his words. Some thought he was a genius, others thought he was a fool, but no one could ignore him. He once said that the true philosopher must care more about the soul than about fame or fortune. and through his questions he tried to awaken that same concern in others. For Socrates, philosophy wasn't a subject to be studied, it was a way to live. Chapter 3. The Socratic Method, Teaching by Asking. Socrates never claimed to be a teacher, yet he taught more powerfully than anyone in his time. He didn't write books, deliver speeches, or give lectures. Instead, he asked questions, simple, direct, and sometimes uncomfortable ones. He would approach someone who claimed to know about justice, courage, or virtue, and begin a conversation. At first it seemed easy, but as the questions went deeper, confidence began to fade. Answers turned uncertain, ideas contradicted themselves, and the person realized that what they thought they knew was only the beginning. This was the Socratic method, a dialogue built on questions and reflection. It was not meant to humiliate, but to awaken. Socrates believed that truth could not simply be told, it had to be discovered within each person. He compared himself to his mother, the midwife. She helped women give birth to children, he helped minds give birth to ideas. Through questioning, he guided others to examine their beliefs and uncover their own contradictions. One of his most famous phrases was, "I know that I know nothing." It wasn't an expression of weakness, it was a statement of wisdom. For Socrates, admitting ignorance was the first step toward understanding. A famous example of this method appears in his dialogue with a man named Euthyphro. Euthyphro claimed to know exactly what piety or holiness meant. Socrates simply asked, "Is what is pious loved by the gods because it is pious, or is it pious because it is loved by the gods?" The question stopped Euthyphro in his tracks. If something is good just because the gods love it, then goodness depends on their opinion. But if the gods love it because it is good, then goodness must exist independently, even beyond the gods themselves. In a few simple questions, Socrates had transformed a confident claim into a deep philosophical puzzle that still challenges thinkers today. Another example comes from his conversation with a young nobleman named Meno. Meno confidently declared that virtue could be taught. Socrates asked him, "But what is virtue?" Meno tried to list examples, the virtue of a man, a woman, a child. Socrates smiled and replied, "You have told me many virtues, but not what virtue itself is." He wanted to find the essence behind the examples, the form that unites them all. The discussion led Meno into confusion, what Socrates called aporia, a state of puzzlement that, for him, was the true beginning of learning. These dialogues were not meant to give answers, but to awaken the habit of questioning. Socrates showed that wisdom is not about having knowledge, but about seeking it relentlessly. This method of learning through questioning would later influence education, science, and law. It inspired thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, and it still shapes the way we reason today. When a teacher encourages students to think for themselves, or when a scientist tests an idea through dialogue and doubt, the spirit of Socrates is alive. Socrates believed that every question brought us closer to truth, and that wisdom began not with answers, but with curiosity. Chapter 4. The Trial of Socrates. By the year 399 BCE, Socrates had become one of the most talked about men in Athens. Some saw him as a hero of wisdom, a moral guide who forced the city to look at itself. But others saw him as dangerous. He questioned everything, the gods, the government, the traditions that held Athens together. And in a city still recovering from war and political chaos, that made people uneasy. His enemies accused him of two crimes, corrupting the youth and not believing in the gods of the city. In truth, what they feared was not his disbelief, but his influence. Young men followed him, including future leaders and thinkers who dared to question authority. For the powerful, that was enough to make him a threat. Socrates was brought before a jury of 500 Athenian citizens. He could have begged for mercy, blamed misunderstandings, or softened his words. But he didn't. Instead, he stood calmly and spoke with the same honesty he had lived by. He told the jury that he was guided by a divine inner voice, a sign from the gods themselves, that warned him whenever he was about to do wrong. He said his mission was to awaken Athens, to challenge complacency, to remind people that wealth and power meant nothing compared to the care of the soul. He declared, "The unexamined life is not worth living." It was both a defense and a challenge, a message to his judges and to all of us. The jury was not moved. By a narrow margin, they found him guilty. And when asked to suggest his own punishment, Socrates, half serious, half defiant, proposed that he should be rewarded with free meals for life, as a benefactor of the city. The jury was outraged. The sentence was death. Friends urged him to flee. They offered to help him escape into exile, but Socrates refused. He said that escaping would betray everything he had stood for. He believed in the laws of Athens, even when they condemned him unjustly. He chose to obey the city he had spent his life questioning. On his final day, surrounded by his followers, he calmly drank a cup of poisoned hemlock. They wept, but he remained serene. He spoke of the soul's immortality and the hope that death was not an end, but a passage to a greater truth. And so, with his last breath, Socrates turned his death into one final lesson: that philosophy is not merely about words, but about the courage to live and die by what one believes to be true. Chapter 5. Legacy, the death that made an idea. Immortal Socrates left no writings. He built no schools, and yet his influence on the world is immeasurable. His students, especially Plato, preserved his ideas through dialogues that explored justice, virtue, courage, and the nature of knowledge. Through Plato, Socrates' teachings traveled through time, shaping the foundation of Western philosophy. Aristotle, in turn, built upon these ideas, and centuries later, thinkers across the world still study the questions Socrates asked. He inspired more than philosophers. His insistence on questioning authority, seeking truth, and examining one's life influenced theologians, scientists, writers, and revolutionaries. From Jesus to Einstein, countless minds have been touched by the courage of a man who admitted he knew nothing. Socrates showed that wisdom is not a treasure to be collected, but a journey to be pursued. He taught that the greatest service we can give ourselves and others is to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, and to think deeply. His death turned him into a symbol, proof that ideas can outlive bodies, and that truth is stronger than fear. The man who drank poison for questioning the world became immortal, not through monuments or wealth, but through the very act of living a life devoted to inquiry. Today, when we examine our own beliefs, confront injustice, or search for meaning, we walk in the footsteps of Socrates. His legacy is not in what he knew, but in the curiosity he inspired in all who came after him. Every question we ask, every mind we awaken, is a tribute to the barefoot philosopher of Athens. Conclusion. What would Socrates ask you? Socrates never told people what to think. He taught them how to think. In a world full of noise, opinions, and certainty, his message is more urgent than ever. Don't just live. Examine your life. Ask questions. Challenge assumptions. Seek truth. Imagine if Socrates were here today. What questions would he ask you? What beliefs would he challenge? The journey of wisdom begins not with answers, but with curiosity. And every question you dare to ask is a step toward understanding yourself and the world around you. So, take a page from the life of the barefoot philosopher of Athens. Question boldly. Think deeply. Live examined. Because, as Socrates taught, a life without reflection is a life half lived.